I've always kept to myself in this neighborhood. I wasn't the loud neighbor, the nosy one, or the type to argue about grass height or garbage days. I just wanted peace. A clean front porch, a working fence, and neighbors who wave without asking too many questions. That's all I needed. I'd been living here for almost 4 years without ever really bothering anyone. The house was mine outright, no mortgage, no stress. I worked remotely, kept my property maintained, and made sure I never gave the HOA a reason to contact me. But if you've ever lived in an HOA-run community, you already know peace doesn't last forever. Especially not when there's someone in charge who craves control more than community. In our case, that someone was Patricia. But everyone, and I do mean everyone, called her Karen. She wore the nickname proudly. Blonde bob haircut, clipboard always in hand, sunglasses that never came off, and a voice loud enough to make you flinch even through a closed window. She was the self-appointed sheriff of our street, even though her only real power came from HOA meetings and newsletters no one read. Patricia had an opinion on everything: where your trash bins sat, how fast delivery trucks drove, how long a guest could stay. You could tell she lived for the drama. She wasn't elected to the HOA board, she practically shoved the last president into retirement and slid into the seat like she was born for it. And once she got it, the rules got tighter, the letters got meaner, and the complaints, constant. Now me. I kept out of her way. Never missed a payment, never violated a rule, at least, not that she could prove. We nodded awkwardly when we crossed paths, but I could always sense she didn't like me. Maybe because I didn't treat her like she was the mayor. Or maybe because she couldn't figure me out. Either way, I stayed clear. A few months ago, I decided to take a proper vacation. I'd been planning it for years. Just a couple of weeks away, off the grid, no emails, no phone calls, just mountains, a rented cabin, and quiet. I told exactly 3 people: my sister, my best friend, and a neighbor I trusted to keep an eye out. Before leaving, I did everything right. Locked every window, turned off the water, set up timers for the lights. I even notified the HOA as a formality. They sent back a generic reply about notifying security patrols and routine neighborhood checks. I didn't think twice about it. I figured, at worst, they'd leave a note about my grass being too long. The first sign something was wrong came 5 days into the trip. I got a motion alert from the smart doorbell. Normally, I'd ignore it. It could have been wind or a bird or a package drop. But this one showed 2 people walking up to my door with suitcases. Then, a minute later, the camera disconnected. Weird. I called my neighbor to check. She drove by and said it looked fine from the outside, no broken windows, lights still on their timer. She didn't see anyone, but she also didn't want to get too close without me being there. I appreciated the caution. Then came another motion alert the next evening. Different people. Again with bags. Then, silence. At that point, I emailed the HOA. I asked if there were any issues or if someone had access to my property for any reason. The response: a vague message saying everything is under control and our patrols are aware of your absence. No real answers. That's when the gut feeling hit me. Something wasn't right. I cut my trip short by 4 days. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew I'd made the right choice. There were 2 unfamiliar cars parked out front. Curtains were drawn, something I never did. The porch light was on in the middle of the day. I opened my front door with my own key. The lock hadn't been changed, which was a small relief, but what I found inside wiped that relief away in seconds. There were shoes by the door. A half-eaten pizza on the counter. A jacket hanging over my kitchen chair. And voices upstairs. Strangers. In my house. And at that moment, I realized, someone had moved people into my home while I was gone. Someone thought they had the right. And I had a very good idea of who that someone might be. I stood in my own living room, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. 2 strangers, young couple, maybe in their late 20s, came down the stairs looking more confused than I was angry. The woman held her phone like it had answers. The guy looked like he'd just seen a ghost. And to be honest, so had I. Can I help you? The guy asked, like I was the one trespassing. I blinked. "This is my house." They exchanged a nervous glance. Then the woman spoke. "Wait, what? We rented this place. We're staying here for the week." "Rented? From who?" She flipped her phone around and showed me an app. Some third-party vacation rental site I'd never even heard of. The listing had pictures of my kitchen, my living room, my backyard. Same paint. Same couch. Even the chipped tile near the fireplace. It was my house, no doubt about it. But I didn't put that listing up. Now I wasn't just angry. I was livid. I told them politely but firmly that they had been scammed, and that they needed to leave. They were apologetic, even embarrassed. Said they'd paid for 6 nights upfront and had no idea it wasn't legitimate. I didn't blame them. They showed me the host's name on the listing. And the second I saw it, everything made sense. Patricia F. Of course. Karen. She'd gone full rogue. Somehow, while I was on vacation, she got access to my house and listed it as a short-term rental under her own name. That explained the motion alerts, the cars, the people. And it explained her smug email telling me everything was under control. I helped the couple pack up. I wasn't going to call the cops on people who clearly didn't know what they'd walked into. They even showed me the messages Patricia sent them. She called herself the property manager. Claimed the owner was a long-term investor who lives out of state. That would have been funny if I wasn't shaking with rage. After they left, I walked through the house and checked every room. Nothing major was stolen, but I could tell people had been sleeping in my bed, using my shower, eating in my kitchen. It made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia directly. No HOA email. No formality. Just raw, direct confrontation. She didn't pick up, of course. But I left a message. Calm voice. Sharp words. I let her know I was home. I let her know I knew. 2 hours later, I got a knock on the door. And there she was. Patricia in her Sunday best, holding that stupid clipboard like it was a badge. "I heard you had some confusion when you returned," she said, smiling like nothing had happened. I didn't say anything. Just stared. She went on. "I assumed you had left town for good." The house looked vacant for days. Overgrown lawn, no lights, no cars. The board agreed it was becoming a concern for property values. That was her angle. Property values? She continued, so I took temporary control of the space. Just to keep it active, of course. We have bylaws that allow temporary management if a home appears abandoned. I raised my eyebrow. There's no such bylaw. I've read them. Her smile twitched. Well, the board is reviewing emergency measures for. Cut the act, Patricia. She stopped talking. I know you rented it. I've seen the listing. I've seen the messages. I've seen the money transfers. Now she looked nervous. A crack in the mask. I didn't mean any harm. It was just a temporary solution. And anyway, the renters were respectful, weren't they? I took a step closer. It's not about the renters. It's about you breaking into my home and profiting off it without permission. That's illegal, Patricia. She didn't respond. Just stood there, lips pressed, probably trying to figure out how to spin this. She still thought she had the upper hand. Still thought I was just another homeowner beneath her self-appointed rule. But what she didn't know, what she was about to find out, was that she didn't own a single thing in this neighborhood. Because I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the landlord of her house. I didn't say anything right away. I just let that silence stretch as Patricia shifted on her feet. You could see her starting to unravel, like a thread getting tugged from a sweater she'd worn a little too tightly for too long. That smug, coy confidence was slipping, and she knew it. But still, she didn't walk away. She was used to controlling every conversation. Every rule. Every neighbor. She didn't realize she was standing on someone else's front porch now, and that someone wasn't playing by her game anymore. I walked past her and stood on my own lawn. From there, I had a clear view of her place, neat on the outside, too perfect really. White siding. Black shutters. Flags always straight. Not a weed in sight. That house had become a symbol of her fake authority in the neighborhood. But it wasn't hers. And she had no idea. I turned to her and said, "Let's talk about your lease." She blinked. "What? Your lease? The one for that house you're living in?" Now she laughed. Actually laughed. "Excuse me? I've been here longer than you. I've lived in that house for over 6 years. I rent it from a private owner who doesn't even live in this state." I nodded slowly. "That's true. The owner doesn't live out of state though. He just doesn't advertise who he is." Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone. Opened the property records. There it was, her address, and under owner, my name. Not a company. Not a holding trust. Just me. Plain and simple. She leaned in to look at the screen like she couldn't trust her own eyes. "You're lying," she said, voice getting thin. "No," I replied, steady. "I bought the property 3 years ago. You've been sending rent checks to a management service that works for me." Her mouth opened. Then closed. She wasn't used to being on the back foot. I could see the gears turning in her head, flipping through excuses, ways out, ways to twist it. But this wasn't one of her HOA meetings. There were no bylaws to hide behind now. "I didn't know," she finally muttered. "Doesn't change what you did," I said. "You broke into my house. You listed it as a rental. You profited from it. You told people I didn't exist. All while living in a house I own." She started to sputter some nonsense about miscommunication, misinterpretation, maybe even community preservation. But it didn't matter. The facts were simple. She trespassed. She stole. And now she was exposed. I told her I'd be sending formal eviction papers through the proper legal channels. That she had 30 days, just like any tenant in violation. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to threaten. I was going to do everything by the book. The same book she always claimed to live by, only this time, the book wasn't hers to write. Patricia tried to save face, claiming she'd talked to her attorney. I said that was a good idea. Then I told her I had footage from the smart doorbell, screenshots of the listing, and messages from the fake property manager account she used. All tied to her name. All ready for court, if it came to that. She didn't speak after that. Just turned around and walked back to the house, my house, with her head slightly lower than before. I watched her go, not out of anger anymore, but out of sheer disbelief that she'd gotten away with so much for so long. The queen of the HOA, strutting around with her clipboard and warnings, thinking she could manipulate the whole street when all along, her throne sat in someone else's castle. And now that someone had finally come home. After Patricia disappeared behind her door, I stood there for a while, letting the whole thing settle in. The neighborhood looked the same as always, same trimmed hedges, same birds chirping, same quiet air. But everything had changed. At least for her. And maybe for the entire HOA, too. I went back inside and started going through everything. I wanted to make sure there were no hidden surprises. The couple that had been staying there seemed decent enough, but still I checked every room, every drawer. I even climbed up into the attic and opened the crawlspace in the garage. Thankfully, nothing seemed stolen or broken. But my trust, that had definitely been shattered. Later that evening, I sat down with my laptop and pulled up the security footage. I watched as Patricia herself walked up to my front door just 3 days after I'd left. She had a key. Not one I gave her, she must have made a copy from a time months ago when the HOA had hired a contractor to inspect roofs, and I'd given temporary access. I never thought someone from the HOA would abuse that trust. But clearly, I'd underestimated her. In the footage, she opened the door like she owned the place. Walked right in. 30 minutes later, she walked out with pictures, probably the ones she used for the fake rental listing. It was surreal watching it all play out. Not even a hint of hesitation. No second guessing. Just a woman on a mission. The next day, I got a message from the property management company I use, the one that handles her rent payments. Apparently, Patricia had contacted them, demanding to know who actually owned her home. They forwarded me the email. She tried to sound calm and professional, but I could see the panic between the lines. I replied with a brief statement. Yes, Patricia. I'm the owner. We'll proceed according to the terms of your lease. Expect formal communication shortly. I didn't need to add anything else. Let her stew in the silence. Within 48 hours, things got interesting. Word spread. Quiet at first. A few neighbors approached me when I walked down the block, cautiously, like they were testing the waters. One of them, Dave from 2 doors down, said, "Hey. I heard you're her landlord. Is that true?" I smiled. "It is." He shook his head and laughed. "Man, that's rich." Apparently, Patricia had told the entire HOA board a different story. She claimed she'd been managing an abandoned property as a community courtesy, and that someone had fraudulently filed paperwork to make it seem like she'd rented it out. Of course, no one really bought it, but they didn't say it out loud. Not yet. The board members started reaching out to me, one by one. Some were just being nosy. Others were probably worried their names were about to end up in the middle of a lawsuit. I assured them I had no intention of dragging anyone down who wasn't involved. But I made one thing very clear: Patricia's time as head of the HOA was over. And then I dropped the bomb. I called a meeting. Not as a concerned neighbor. Not as a guest. But as the property owner of 5 homes on the block, including Patricia's. I had every right to attend. And what I said at that meeting would finally pull the curtain back on everything she'd been hiding. People showed up curious. A few looked uncomfortable. Patricia walked in late, sunglasses on, lips tight. She sat near the back and didn't say a word. I started with the basics. How she accessed my home. The false listing. The money exchanged. The doorbell footage. The receipts. I kept it simple, factual. No yelling, no drama. Just the truth, laid out for everyone to see. Some people gasped. Others just stared at her. A few even whispered to each other. And Patricia? She stared straight ahead like if she didn't look at me, the whole thing might disappear. But it wasn't disappearing. It was just beginning. After the meeting, the neighborhood changed. Not instantly. Not with fireworks or applause. But slowly, in the way people looked at each other, the way they spoke in passing. People started to realize what had been happening under their noses. For years, Patricia had ruled over everyone, citing rules, threatening fines, sending notes for grass length and garbage bins. But now they saw her for what she was, a self-appointed queen sitting on a throne she didn't own. The very next day, someone slid a note under my door. No name, just block handwriting. "Thank you for standing up to her. We've needed that for a long time." I wasn't trying to be a hero. Honestly, I just wanted my house back and my privacy restored. But what Patricia had done crossed so many lines that ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. And now, it seemed like I wasn't the only one who felt that way. I started getting emails from residents, some I barely knew, telling me their own Patricia stories. How she'd threatened to have their cars towed for being parked a little too close to the curb. How she once fined a veteran for hanging the wrong size flag. How she'd manipulated votes on HOA issues and bullied newer residents into silence. It was a pattern. One I hadn't seen because, frankly, I tried to stay out of HOA drama. But now it was unavoidable. I filed the eviction paperwork like I said I would. Not to be cruel, just to show her that actions have consequences. Patricia responded by trying to counterclaim that I'd unlawfully harassed a tenant, but it didn't go far. All the evidence was there. Her forged listing. Her communications with the renters. The security footage. The access logs. Everything pointed right back to her. 2 weeks later, I got a notice from the HOA board. An emergency vote had been scheduled, one to determine whether Patricia should be removed as president. Funny thing was, she didn't even call the vote. Someone else on the board did. Apparently, they'd had enough too. The meeting took place at the community clubhouse. More people showed up than I'd ever seen at a neighborhood event. Couples with folding chairs. Retirees with notepads. New families with babies on hips. The energy in the room was tense, like something big was about to go down. Patricia arrived dressed to impress, as usual. White blouse, pearls, clipboard in hand. But the usual smugness was gone. She scanned the room and saw the eyes watching her, not with respect, but with suspicion. For once, she wasn't controlling the room. When the motion to remove her was read aloud, Patricia tried to interrupt. She went on a tirade about unfair treatment, jealous neighbors, and conspiracies against her leadership. But no one flinched. The evidence was too strong. The silence in the room told her everything. They voted. One by one. Hands went up. And when it was over, the numbers were clear. Patricia was officially removed as HOA president. She stood frozen for a moment, like she couldn't believe it. Then she picked up her clipboard, walked out the door, and didn't look back. I thought that might be the end of it. But then, a week later, she did something unexpected. Instead of just packing up and leaving quietly, Patricia listed her house, my house, for sublease, without asking. Again. It was almost laughable at that point. Like she couldn't help herself. This time, I didn't bother warning her. I contacted my management company and started formal eviction proceedings immediately. There would be no wiggle room, no grey area. She had broken the lease. Again. And this time, it wasn't just HOA rules she'd violated. It was the law. Within days, the sheriff's office posted a formal notice on her door. And this is where it all came full circle, because the officer who delivered that notice knew exactly what had been going on. He looked me in the eye as he stapled the paper to the front door and said, "You've been patient. More than most would be." She had this coming. I didn't say much back. Just nodded and stepped aside. Patricia wasn't home when it was posted. But I knew when she saw it, she'd realize her power wasn't just slipping, it was gone. The notice stayed on the door for 3 days before Patricia finally removed it. I knew she'd seen it, because the next morning, I watched her from across the street, phone clutched in one hand, pacing her front yard like a caged animal. She was on the phone with someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe a friend, but her face said everything. She wasn't in control anymore, and the panic was catching up. She kept trying to act like nothing had happened. She still waved at the neighbors with that tight smile, still strutted to her mailbox with her shoulders square, still kept her yard looking like a magazine cover. But something was different. People weren't waving back. Conversations stopped when she passed by. All those years she spent making people feel small had finally caught up to her, and now she was the one walking on eggshells. Meanwhile, the renters she'd planted in my house were long gone. After I returned from my trip and made it clear the lease was fake, they packed up and left without a fight. Turns out, they didn't even know she wasn't the owner. They'd been told she was the property manager. She'd even made up a fake email account with a generic name to handle their application. I contacted them personally to make sure they weren't going to get caught up in anything legal. They were embarrassed but cooperative. They'd kept receipts, email threads, and even a signed paper lease one Patricia had typed herself. That document was the final nail. With everything lined up, emails, lease, security footage, bank records, the eviction hearing was scheduled. I didn't expect her to show up, but she did. Dressed sharp again, full of the same rehearsed dignity she always wore when she knew she was losing. She brought a folder of papers and a lawyer who looked like he had only just learned her name. The judge listened to both sides. I kept it simple, showed my property records, proved the lease was fraudulent, highlighted the unauthorized use of the home, and laid out her history of deception. Patricia's lawyer tried spinning it as a misunderstanding, suggesting that Patricia thought she had permission and acted in good faith. But the judge wasn't buying it. Halfway through the session, Patricia started interrupting. She kept trying to explain herself directly to the judge, who had to warn her more than once to remain quiet. At one point, she actually snapped, and accused me of trying to ruin her life. That's when her lawyer leaned in and quietly told her to stop talking. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I just waited while the judge reviewed everything. And when he ruled in my favor, I finally let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. She had 14 days to vacate. No extensions. No tricks. And this time, it was enforceable by law. The next few days were strangely quiet. I expected more drama, maybe a last-minute stunt, but Patricia stayed out of sight. Cars came and went from her driveway. Boxes were loaded. Curtains were drawn. It was the most peaceful the house had looked in years. Neighbors began to approach me with relief. One older woman, Mrs. Jensen, actually baked me cookies. She said she hadn't slept well in months because she was scared of speaking up about Patricia. "You did what none of us could," she said. "You showed her we're not afraid anymore." I didn't really know what to say to that. I hadn't done it for praise. I did it because it was right. Because people like Patricia count on others being too polite, too scared, too tired to fight back. But once someone pushes, once someone makes it clear that they won't back down, that's when the whole house of cards starts to fall. On the 13th day, a moving truck pulled up. She stood outside directing the movers, still wearing her sunglasses, still trying to look composed. But she didn't speak to anyone. Not a single word. She just got in her car and drove away without saying goodbye. As the dust settled, I stood at the edge of the street, watching the truck pull off. Her reign was finally over, and the street felt lighter. Like it could breathe again. Like everyone could finally stop looking over their shoulder. After Patricia was gone, there was this strange quiet in the neighborhood, but not an empty kind. It was the kind of silence you notice when a storm passes and everything is still. The air felt clearer, and people walked their dogs without that tense glance over their shoulder. Kids played on the sidewalks without their parents rushing them inside at the sight of a clipboard. I started getting invited to things again. Little things. A backyard barbecue. A morning walk with the retirees. Even the new couple at the corner brought me a pie and said they'd heard about the situation. It was like people had been waiting for someone to stand up, and now that the dust had settled, they wanted to reclaim their space, their peace. A few folks on the board approached me with a strange question. They asked if I'd ever considered running for HOA president. I laughed at first. I didn't want that job. I just wanted my home to be my home, not a battlefield. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the neighborhood needed rebuilding. Not physically, but emotionally. Patricia had ruled with fear and fines. Maybe it was time for someone to lead with respect instead. I didn't say yes. Not yet. I told them I'd think about it. But things were changing. The board held another emergency session, this time to amend a few outdated policies. Turns out, Patricia had been the one writing most of the rules herself, or at least interpreting them however she wanted. With her gone, the board finally had the freedom to revise things. We all sat in a circle, not a stage, no head of the table, and went line by line through the HOA charter. One by one, we got rid of the rules that made no sense. The one about no holiday decorations before December 15th. The one that said all front doors had to be beige. We replaced fines with warnings, and warnings with actual conversations. Suddenly, people weren't just following the rules, they were helping to shape them. And then something unexpected happened. The renters who had been tricked by Patricia, they reached out again. They said they'd loved the house and the neighborhood, even with everything that had happened. They asked if I'd ever consider renting it again, officially this time. I thought about it. I didn't blame them for any of this, and honestly, they had been polite through the entire mess. So I agreed. We drew up a new lease, legally sound, properly filed, with everything transparent. They moved back in, and this time, they knew exactly who their landlord was. They even brought me a housewarming plant. Weeks passed. Then months. Seasons changed. The trees turned gold and orange, and the sidewalks filled with leaves. Life kept moving, but the neighborhood felt right. For the first time in a long while, there was balance. And the strangest part? I actually started enjoying the community. The same one I used to avoid because of Patricia's tight grip. Without her, there was room to breathe and to grow. One afternoon, as I was walking back from the mailbox, which was still standing, "Thank you very much," I saw a few board members chatting in the street. They waved me over. "We're holding elections next month," one of them said. "We think you should run." I didn't answer right away. Just smiled and nodded. Later that evening, I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the sun sink behind the hills. That house, my house, finally felt like mine again. The drama, the stress, the chaos Patricia had stirred up, It had all led to this moment. A calm. A peace. A community that didn't just live next to each other but actually looked out for one another. I picked up the election form that had been dropped in my mailbox. Folded once. Clean print. Just a name and a box to check. Maybe I'd check it. Maybe I wouldn't. But for the first time in a long time, I had the choice. And no HOA Karen could take that away from me again.